Well, hello and a very warm welcome to another thrilling episode of the Andrew Eborn Show, where I'm joined by somebody who I don't even recognise. It's somebody in disguise. Hello.
Good evening. Humbug. It's humbug, I say.
I thank you. Oh, you got a waistcoat to match your eyes. I love it.
I've done it, haven't I? Yeah,
Look
well, that was this
you.
morning.
You've only got and done it. You see, amongst all that sort of stuff. Well, how glorious is this? Because last time, I'm so glad that last time you didn't come on as a chicken or something because we were doing the discovery of witchcraft. You know, this time.
Got an idea now.
Next time the feathers and everything will be a thrill. We were talking about the fabulous Charles Dickens and the importance that he plays not just around the area where I am in Regent's Park, because just over the road is the Marylebone Church, but his importance in literature. He was also, and we left it temptingly last time, saying what a glorious influence he was and what a great practitioner as well about magic. Let's start there.
Well, very much so. Dickens loved magic. Each Christmas, his children always recalled how every Christmas he put on a Christmas show. He'd entertain at their various houses. The one you're talking about was the one at Devonshire House, which was where you've got that wonderful plaque on the wall by where he was, which he's got. He wrote 6 novels whilst living there, and they've got the characters. Of course, most famously probably would be Scrooge now. So you've got Scrooge and Tiny Tim there, but you've got David Copperfield. But no, his children always recalled every Christmas, especially on Twelfth Night, he would put on a magic show. Their friends would come, and he'd do things like make Christmas puddings appear from a top from a top hat. Which I'm not going to do.
I know. I think you should, just on principle. You should make it. But how many puddings did he make appear?
I've got one in the top hat.
How many puddings would he make appear?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think they ever recalled that. I don't think that was ever recorded. I think
we should make it up. I reckon there were 7. I think one Christmas time, when they're particularly hungry, he produced 7 Christmas pudding.
They can't have done. Rule of 6.
Ah, yes, they've all changed it now, haven't they? It's all got to be good. So he was a magician. So do we know where he would have seen his first magicians of those sort of era?
Yes, he would have bought. I mean, you could get magic books there. So, but when he was a young boy, he used to love the theatre. He was and the shows he used to go to were the penny shows, the Penny Garrett shows. So basically, you'd have a full night's entertainment. I mean, don't forget they didn't have television then, so he'd have a full night's entertainment. He'd make his way to the theatre. They'd watch a bit of burlesque. They'd watch dancers. They'd have a play, and then there'd be a comedian. And many of his characters, for example, Jingle, Alfred Jingle in Pickwick Papers. Very much he's based on an actor called Charles Matthews, who used to go on stage and these wonderful monologues where he'd talk about going down the Nile with crates as big as houses, and that becomes the staccato manner in which Alfred Jingle speaks in Pickwick Papers. Heads, mind your heads, dangerous place, very yesterday, lady, medium lady, sitting on carriage, eating sandwich, didn't see overhang, head hit overhang, head came off. Sandwich in hand, but nowhere to put it.
And we love that sort of humour. And what I also like is the influence of the theatre on the young Dickens. And I think this is what you're seeing now when people are talking about encouraging people to go to the theatre, go to pantomimes and things like that, and with all of the writing, it's exposing people to literature at an early age because it sparks the imagination, doesn't it?
Very much so. And the point about Dickens and theatre is that love of theatre never left him. And it's, the first thing he wrote in installments. So he never wrote complete novels, he wrote installments. But he had this love of theatre, and he wrote his novels or his installments, he wrote them as theatrical pieces. And that's why he translates so well onto the TV screen, on the stage. And that's why because he wrote in installments, that's why the episodes are so good. Because the customary way to do it would be, the novelist would write the novel, and then it would be broken down into installments. But Dickens wrote specifically for installments. He didn't write the complete text, so he didn't know where the text was going. When he started, he might, and he wouldn't know till the end. That's why you get some. Oliver Twist is a classic example. He learned very early on in Oliver Twist that the more he made Oliver suffer in one installment, the more copies he would sell the next installment. And so he has all these horrible things happen to Oliver. But that's why the last part of Oliver, the last chapter, it's why it's so complicated, because he's got all these threads out there that he suddenly has to bring back together. And but that's why he's so good on TV, because he's got the natural cliffhangers. So he would have been writing EastEnders in his day. He was
Look at
sorry,
Tim.
my hat nearly fell off.
Get out of the pub.
Is Colonel Tom back from Yorkshire again?
Oh yes, he should. That'd be fantastic. I love the idea of Dickens.
Has he appeared in a Dickens novel now?
The Dirty Den, absolutely, and Ange. Oh, no, I remember those were the good old days.
They would. Merry Christmas, Ange.
We love it. Show us your Christmas puddings. I know it should be fantastic. Well, oh dear.
You're right there.
Yes, I thank you. Always went down the wrong way, as I used to say. down the old swirl. I love it. So tell me about Dickens and this particular era. Tell me about him and Marylebone.
Well, round where you were, that's. Are you all right? Are you going to survive long enough for me to tell you? Well, I mean, Marylebone in his day, or certainly in his early youth, I mean, we're going out into the countryside. I mean, we are heading out of cramped central London. London's just starting to expand when he becomes famous in 1836 with Pickwick Papers. And then at the time, he was living in bachelor apartments in Furnival's Inn, which was down on Holborn. It's now at the site of the Prudential Life Assurance building. But whilst he was living there, he got married. He wrote Pickwick Papers. Pickwick set him on the road to fame and fortune. And then they had their first child whilst living in Furnival's Inn. And they had to move out. And they moved to Doughty Street, which is where the Charles Dickens Museum now is. That's the only one of his houses that survives. And then from there, during the almost 3 years he was there, he finished Pickwick Papers, wrote Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, starts work on Barnaby Rudge. But the significance is that when he went to live there, he was just making his name in England. When he moved out 3 years later, he was famous all over the world. And that's where it happened. And he was now able to take the lease on a much larger house. So that's when he moved to Devonshire House, which was the house which was on the corner. Well, Old Marylebone. It's besides that side entrance into St. Marylebone Church.
No, absolutely. And the church is glorious. It's got little memories of Dickens in there, because I think he got married and his son was baptized there as well.
Yeah, children christened there. He got married in St. Luke's Church in Chelsea. But yeah, I mean, and that was the area. But the other importance of it was just across the road from him lived, or just on the corner in Park Lodge. I often see your little videos when you go around Regent's Park,
Yes.
when you go past Park Lodge, and that's where his great friend William Macready lived. Now, William Macready was a leading Shakespearean actor at the time, but he's about the only friend Dickens had that he didn't fall out with. Dickens was very thin-skinned, and he fell out with almost every friend except for William Macready and John Forster, both of whom he needed. So he didn't fall out with them. But John Forster was his sort of legal advisor, because John Forster was a barrister. William Macready was a top-rate actor, and he really was the man who Dickens turned to when he started giving his public readings, because Macready was famous throughout the world as well. And so Macready really, and Macready was incredibly impressed by Dickens' acting ability, that he hadn't had any formal education in acting or lessons in acting. But he was one of those people. He was a natural actor, and people used to pay fortunes. People used to scalp the tickets. There was ticket scalps out there selling the tickets into his public readings. They were hugely popular. 2,000 or so people they would attend those readings, and it was all done, if you think, by gaslight and candlelight. And Dickens would walk out onto the stage. He'd pause. He'd look up, and then he would address, just using the power of his own voice, he would speak to an auditorium of 2,000 or 3,000 people. And people at the very top of that theatre, in that auditorium, very top row of seats, they would sit there and they'd say to the person next to them, "I've paid 3 guineas for this and I can't hear a bloody word."
Everyone's a winner. We love
I'm here all week, folks. I'm here all week.
Thank you. That's what we were afraid of. But you mentioned about Dickens and one of his chums being a lawyer, which is interesting because Dickens had a certain view of lawyers, didn't he?
He did. Dickens, first of all, was a stenographer. He learnt shorthand whilst working in Gray's Inn. He worked for a company called Ellis and Blackmore. and he learnt shorthand. And he actually learnt the Gurney method of shorthand, which was the predecessor to Pitman. And with that, he was then able to set himself up as a freelance stenographer in a place called Doctors' Commons, which used to be down by St. Paul's Cathedral. Yeah. It's more or less where the British Telecom building is on Queen Victoria Street. And he basically, Doctors' Commons was a court that dealt in marriage, probate, church cases, wills and probate, marriage and divorce. And he called that period the most usefulest period of my life, because he got to see how the law works, or as he saw it, how the law doesn't work. And it left him with this contempt for law and lawyers, which stuck with him through his entire life. And in fact, there's only one, in all his novels and the short, there's only one lawyer who he portrays in really with any sympathy, and that's Mr. Grewgious, Hiram Grewgious in The Mystery of Edwin Drood. And he's got, Dickens is off-quoted, obviously his most off-quoted one is that wonderful quote from Mr. Mumble when he makes that quote: "If the law says that, then the law, sir, is an ass, an idiot. The law, sir, ain't never been married." That's perhaps his most favorite is the law is an ass.
And what we always say, and as us lawyers have to stick together, yes, we are. The law is an ass. Hard-working, dedicated servant to mankind is what we are as an ass. That's what he really meant, Dickens, when he wrote.
That's what he meant. That's what he meant. And
I mean, really,
is that your opinion? Is that your opinion?
Yes, I'll send you.
How much are you going to charge me for your opinion?
A fortune. The bill's already in the post. It's got to be good. That little knock on the door, that's to make that all make sense. It's always a thrill. No, but the other thing is, and lawyers have always been the butt of jokes throughout history, haven't they? I mean, even when you look at Steven Spielberg and the Jurassic Park, everybody cheered when the Tyrannosaurus came and ate the lawyer.
Everybody likes to knock lawyers unless the lawyer's on their side.
Yes,
this is the point about Dickens, though. For someone who had said so many famous quotes, anti-lawyer, virtually every one of his best friends was a lawyer. Right. John Forster, his great advisor, first biographer, he was a barrister. He trained as a barrister. Sergeant Telford, all his best friends were. Even himself, when he had his first flop with Martin Chuzzlewit when he'd been to America and then come back and written American notes for general circulation, and they'd flopped. Martin Chuzzlewit then flopped, and he thought his career was over. So he applied to, I think it was Middle Temple, and applied to become a lawyer. He wanted to become a barrister, but he didn't keep terms. He didn't eat the required number of dinners. So consequently, he couldn't do it. But at that time, Christmas Carol had actually come out, and it restored his reputation. But his eldest son, sorry, not his eldest son, but the son who perhaps became the most successful was Sir Henry Fielding Dickens. And he became a top barrister in Your Inn of Court in a Temple.
Absolutely.
And in fact, he was the man who welcomed the first female barrister to the bar.
And that's glorious, isn't it? There's a rich, rich history. And you and I have done a lot together going around the Inns of Court. But you do wonderful walks, which is why you invested in the outfit. And
that's it.
It off. It's got to be good. You've invested in the outfit because you do these walks around London talking about Dickens London. So give us some of the highlights of when you go on this walk. Where do you go and what do you tell them?
Well, where do I go? I go everywhere. One of the great things about Dickens is there's hardly any part of London that you can't go that he wasn't there before you. I do love going down by the Marshalsea prison where his father John was in prison in 1824. That's a fantastic location. It's just down on Borough High Street, and you walk down that passageway, and there's the one surviving wall of the Marshalsea prison, and that's where John Dickens, Dickens' father, was imprisoned for debt. The entire family went into the prison with him, except for Charles and his sister Frances, or Fan as he knew her. Charles was then sent to the blacking warehouse, and this is another place I like to do. It was Warren's blacking or shoe polish warehouse over where Hungerford Market, but it's where Charing Cross railway station stands today. And Dickens was actually working there, and his job was to stick labels onto pots of boot blacking. Wow. And it really traumatized him. And it could be argued that it was those streets around Southwark with his father in prison where Dickens' genius was forged, because it left him with this legacy. If there's one character Dickens does brilliantly, it's the abandoned child. Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Pip, even Scrooge in Christmas Carol, when the ghost of Christmas Past takes him back to the school days, and you've got the abandoned child in the classroom.
And I think
That's
you're right.
Dickens.
Writing from experience is always the
Yeah.
most credible way that writers can do that. And you're right. Give me a child to the age of 7, as Socrates, when he's not playing football, used to say, I'll show you the man. And I think when you look at Dickens growing up and his childhood and so on and so forth, and the difficulties that his father had, and debtors' prison, I mean, horrible in those days, wasn't it? You going to prison if you couldn't pay your debts. And it was a
Well,
miserable life.
it wasn't. It wasn't. It was debtors' prisons were a very weird concept because if you could afford it, you could actually have quite a nice life inside the debtors' prison.
Well, if
It
you can afford it. I mean,
how bizarre is that? The basic point was of the debtors' prison was that uh, by going into the debtors' prison, you'd be ashamed, or your relatives would be ashamed, and they would cough up to pay off your debts because it was bringing shame on the family. But a lot of people, when they got in there, their friends, I mean, this happens with Mr. Pickwick in Pickwick Papers. When he goes into the Fleet prison, his friends take furniture. He leases furniture off the turnkey. His friends take victuals into, they take wine, they take the hampers into him. And he's got quite a nice little lifestyle in there. So if you could, if your family could actually afford to keep you and you could afford to pay the turnkey and rent furniture, it was a bit like sort of a hotel, like a nice little hotel.
so, so
And
a
John
good way of
Dickens
doing it.
seems
So
to.
bed and breakfast, but don't your creditors sort of say, well, hang about, you shouldn't be eating a fine supper there. You should be paying us.
But that's the beauty of it. They can't touch you because you're inside the prison. It's a bit like what the Americans call Chapter 11 today, but with walls around it.
Chapter 11 with walls. So you do those two locations. You go to Charing Cross, you go to Borough Market. Where else do you go?
I also, the Inns of Court. I mean, you got the Inns of Court were a stomping ground for Dickens. And nice thing, I mean, like Inner Temple, well, not at the moment because there's scaffolding all over it, but certainly Middle Temple and those little squares. Dickens called it the quiet and cloisterly temple. He said, you can read on its gates, who enters here leaves noise behind. And go in there on a winter's night when the gas lamps are lit. And you wouldn't be surprised if Charles Dickens were to come strolling down one of the lanes or avenues.
And I remember that. As you know, I used to have a scholarship flat in the Temple.
Hare Court.
Right, exactly, number 2 Hare Court, right at the top. I was just a kid.
I've seen the blue plaque on the wall.
Yeah, that's me nailing it in. Bit of blue tack. I think that's what I used. Blue tack for the blue plaque. That's what I used to pull it off accordingly. But living in the Temple, it was a real honour. But there was a little man, he was little, he used to go around and every night, he still did it, he would light the gas lamps and you felt as though you shut away all of history outside, all of the modern world, and you were in a little cocoon, if you like, that wonderful sort of era. And it's a glorious place, isn't it?
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Although it has to be said, fewer and fewer barristers are in there now. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few years. But I just love that area, the Inns of Court. I just think it's so wonderful. And of course, another thing Dickens was very fond of was pubs. So you've got these wonderful pubs like the George on Borough High Street, the Old Mitre, the Hidden Away pub just off Hatton Garden there, the City of York, and then going down Fleet Street, you've got the Old Cheshire Cheese.
I know. I was going to say isn't that the oldest pub? It always claims to be the oldest pub in London.
Tricky one, that, because they all claim to be.
I know. I was going to say it's on the wall. Say we are the oldest pub, and I think if you put ye old Cheshire cheese,
yeah,
and the same way as ye old cock, I think is right by
that's it.
Right by the Temple.
Just behind.
Yeah.
Just behind Temple there. Yeah, the Old Cheshire Cheese. It was certainly the first pub to be rebuilt after the Great Fire of London. So I think you're safe with that claim. But then the prospect of Whitby claims to be the oldest, but then others pop up every so often. Of course, it's like the road sweeper's broom, though, isn't it? You know, you change the head, you change the handle, and you put up a brick facade, you put up more beams, you put up more brickwork. It's still the same pubs.
But they are glorious, and I do love. I mean, the pubs round that area are particularly special. I mean, there's one which used to be the Bank of England, the old Bank of England, which has a glorious chandelier and wonderful oak beams and things like that, and it's been converted into a pub and actually done quite tastefully.
It was, yeah. I mean, that used to be the Bank of England's law courts branch. That was in fact, one thing that used to happen, it doesn't now, but the Bank of England, if you worked for the Bank of England, up until fairly recently, you got a Bank of England checkbook, and it's so you had they were very ornate checks as well. And people could never use them because nobody believed that there was actually a Bank of England. So, but you couldn't get a bank card with it because it had the same guarantee that the notes have on it. I promised to pay the bearer. So it's yeah, but they had that branch there, and of course that wonderful branch where you've got just next to where you've got that outer temple that goes past the barristers' chambers and then comes out in the middle temple. But next to that is the Lloyd's. I think it's Lloyd's Bank, Law Courts
Yes,
Bank.
it was my first bank when I was a baby lawyer. I used to go in there with my tuppence halfpenny for my brief fees and pay them in. Please, sir, can I pay the money in? It was straight out of Oliver Twist. It was great.
I was going to say, there's Oliver.
It was Oliver, that wonderful influence. But this is what I love so many of that sort of area. It is steeped in history. Every single inch that you crawl over has dripping with history, isn't it? So when you're going on your tours, and many pubs were named after Dickens, weren't they? When did that tradition start?
Named after Dickens, or
yes, there's many Dickens Inn and Dickens.
There's Dickens. There's Dickens Inn in St Catherine's Dock, yes. Which has really got nothing to do with Dickens because
it just stole the name. Yes,
it was an old warehouse that I think it was a spice warehouse that they moved it on wheels across the dock to where it's located now. I'm trying to think of another one that's named after Dickens in London. I mean,
they've got a few around that, and up and down the country. If you have a pub near you called Dickens, write to us at dickens@octopustv.com, and we'll tell the world. We're popular.
Tell the world.
Tell the world about Dickens in. But I also love the other thing I love about Dickens as well is that every single where that he goes, there is a tale to tell about him because he was quite a character, as you say, in and of himself, not just about where the books reflect part of his life. And I think you're right, the abandoned child was what he was as a child. And therefore he can write from experience, which is why it's so rich in that sort of stuff. You spend a lot of time down that area around the temple and the various pubs and so on and so forth. Where do you go after that?
Home. No, I mean it's where the mood takes me. I do like to go down to just off Strand. You've got that wonderful section where you've got the Adelphi Arches.
Yes.
And if you go to the, I think it's the Royal Society, just off Strand. If you go, I mean, you can't get into it at the moment. But if you go down through the one off John Adams Street, if you're going through that door there, you can sign in the guest book, and then they've got a fantastic little coffee bar down in the basement. And you can go down through that, and you're in some of the old Adelphi Arches, which Dickens, when he was in the blacking warehouse, he used to love exploring the Adelphi Arches. And then you can go up the road, go to Chandos Place, and there's a blue plaque on the wall of TGI Fridays in Chandos Place that says Charles Dickens worked here as a boy, which was news to me because none of his biographers mention him working at TGI Fridays, but it's on the plaque. It must be true.
You want fries with that?
That's it. Yeah. Fries with your Pickwick.
I thank you. It's always leave my Pickwick out of it. It's always a joy. Yeah, but this is what we love about it, because you could have a blue plaque actually virtually on every street with Dickens, as you say, because he used to wander around. He was a real character in town. People knew him in the streets, and it's as you say, it was one of the world's first, if you like, real superstars, because he made it big in his lifetime worldwide.
Yeah, he was. I mean, he was, in my opinion. Some people would say Byron was, but I think, in my opinion, he was the world's first celebrity, in the modern sense of the word, because he understood that celebrity is a brand in its own right. And he was very aware of brand Dickens. He was fanatical about brand Dickens. That's why when his marriage ended in 1857-58, when he separated from his wife, that's why he didn't divorce her, because he felt that brand Dickens was family. Brand Dickens was Christian, house, hearth and home. And if it came out that he run off with a young actress, then he felt it would destroy his brand.
And he was the original brand expert. We're taking a character as a brand himself. And this is why, when you talk about him having very thin skin, he's very worried. He's very sensitive to critics. He wouldn't like people criticizing him. He wouldn't like friends who might tell him a few home truths occasionally, because they're damaging to his brand, aren't they?
Very much so, and that's why he fell out with so many people, especially when he broke up with his wife. The way he treated her was shocking. He wrote letters to the newspapers saying that she was an unfit wife and mother. He did all sorts of things, and a lot of his friends disagreed with the way he treated his wife. But in his mind now, you're either for him or you're against him, and if you're against him, you were cut out from his life. He would cut you out, and he did lose a lot of friends. In fact, one of his great friends, and they were huge friends, was Angela Burdett Coutts, the Coutts banking heiress.
Yes.
And they met when he was very first becoming famous with Pickwick Papers. That's when he met her, and then he became. She was a very shy woman, so she didn't like. She was basically, she'd inherited the Coutts banking fortune, and she set about giving it away to good causes. And all over London today, you can find like fountains and places, flower markets that she actually paid for. I got to Edinburgh, Greyfriars Bobby, the statue of Greyfriars Bobby, that was paid by her. Go to Old St Pancras Burial Ground, and you've got the big fountain memorial in there that was paid for by Baroness Burdett Coutts, or Angela Burdett Coutts as she was at the time. But Dickens became her advisor. He advised on her charitable giving, and they did all sorts of things together. But significantly, she paid for his eldest son, Charlie, to go to Eton College.
Wow.
So, and that's a massive social leap the Dickens family make in that one generation. There's him when he's 11 and 12 working in the blacking warehouse. His father's in prison, and now his son's going to Eton.
I know, phenomenal on that sort of basis. And what I love about Coutts as well, talking about history, because they do it to this day, they all have these frock coats where, and I've had the pleasure and the honour of dining in their dining room there, just off the Strand, and you're greeted by this chap with a wonderful frock coat, and they have like a little koi carp swimming around in the foyer, and all that sort of things. And the great thing I love one thing I like about Coutts as a bank is they give you leather goods. So you basically your checkbook is made of leather, and the wonderful sort of wallets that they give you, all of those sort of things.
Can we see yours now then? Or?
Oh, you probably can actually. I do. I have a Coutts wallet and leather check holders and exciting things like that. So they do look after you, and it's that wonderful thing about tradition. And this is when you're talking about Dickens. When we attract all the tourists from around the world, they love it, don't they? They love to come and see London, and where Dickens might have worked, and where he walked, and where he talked, and where anything that had Dickens on it. So your walks and your talks must be an absolute sellout.
Oh, it's wonderful. Well, they were.
Yes, I mean, they will be again, but it's...
my great expectations have slumped at the moment.
Thank you, yes.
But no, I mean, and the thing is, he's still studied. I mean, think what you will about Michael Gove. I mean, one thing he did do was put Dickens back on the curriculum, and school children are now discovering the beauty of Christmas. I mean, they study Christmas Carol, they study Oliver Twist, Great Expectations as well. And the nice thing is that they are coming. He was a great storyteller, and I think the art of storytelling in novels is. Really, I mean, apart from maybe J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter stories, it was tending to sort of be seen as old-fashioned, the traditional novel structure. And I think people are starting to see again now just how wonderful that, a really good, gripping novel, a gripping story, page-turner, if you like. And Dickens was a great one for writing. His novels are great page-turners. I mean, there's lots of boring bits in it because he was writing in installments and he had to pad the installment out. But there's always bits where it suddenly grabs your attention. There's characters. His characters, they leap off the page at you, and you can almost feel them standing in front of you telling their story.
Oh, and absolutely, and that is the real secret now. We see a lot of these movies with these massive multi-zillion-dollar budgets and special effects and everything else. And so often the most important element of any of these things is the story. Get the story right. And then whatever medium you're telling it in, whatever budget you have to tell it, the reality is it's the story, it's the writing that has to be at the heart of any of these things, doesn't it?
That's it. And when you think of that, I mean, he's written probably what is the, would I say it's, I mean, certainly Christmas Carol is up there with the best sellers of all time. I don't think it's ever been out of print. I think it's one of his novels that's never been out of print. It's never gone out of fashion either. People love it as much today as they did then, and it's something that can be adapted to all ages as well. There's so much terrific stuff it's such a lovely story. The story of Scrooge's dark night of the soul and his journey to redemption in the company of the three spirits. And in many ways, I mean, it often gets described as a ghost story, but it's a parable dressed up as a ghost story. That redemption's there for us all, and I think in this day and age, it's even more pertinent.
And then talk about Dickens then and his own spiritual life. And what did he believe?
Dickens, he wasn't a great believer in organised religion. He wasn't particularly fond of organised religion. He basically he did go to church, he did worship.
The Marylebone Church, just over the road from us. Absolutely.
Yeah, and but on the whole, he wasn't a great one for all. He basically didn't see the point in organised religion, and was very much. Very much. Catholicism, for example, one of his other great friends was Clarkson Stanfield, and or Stanny, as Dickens knew him. Now he was actually a very strict Catholic. His funeral service was held in St. Mary's Church, the Catholic church up in Hampstead. And Dickens actually attended the church service there. But him and Stanley, they actually, they didn't fall out as much, but the relationship cooled, because when Dickens spent his year in Italy in 1844, he wanted Stanley to do some of the illustrations. And Stanley didn't like the attacks Dickens had made on the Catholic Church, or Catholicism in the novel. So that their relationship cooled at that period there. But no, he just didn't believe in organized religion. And he didn't believe, for example, him and Angela Burdick Coutts, they founded a place together called Urania Cottage, which was a reform home for prostitutes out in Shepherd's Bush. And unusually for charity in those days, Dickens was emphatic that religion would play no part in it. The deal with most charities that tried to offer solace or reform to prostitutes was that you had to embrace the Bible, go to church, etc. And Dickens was emphatic that wasn't going to happen. That he made the point actually that most of these women, they've become prostitutes because of what society's done to them. It's necessity, and often they've either been wronged by a man, or society's done it to them. It's the only way they can survive. So Dickens well understood. And if you look at his sympathetic portrayal in Nancy, is perhaps the most famous prostitute in Dickens, in Oliver Twist, and then you go through the various other novels. But he's always got a sort of almost a soft spot for them.
He does. He definitely has a soft spot for the hard done by, and I think it's looking, and but it's also an understanding, because a lot of people, when they write, and we come on to some other writers later on in the series, but so often they're writing without doing experience. You have to go and do your research and so on and so forth. But Dickens lived it, as you say. His father was in the poorhouse. We had all those sort of experiences. He would have had an affinity, seeing lots of people down on their luck. He would have spoken to them, lived and breathed for a long time before he even put pen to paper.
Exactly, yeah, and his father was in the prison, not the poorhouse, by the way. But
yeah, the prison, yes.
Yeah, but
the debtors' prison, the debtors.
But no, I mean, he understood it, because he knew that that could have been him. That when you hear about Charlie Bates, Artful Dodger, all the street urchins from Little Joe in Bleak House, all those child characters are street urchins, and Dickens knew full well that that could so easily have been him, and yet from his own, and really by his own endeavours. I mean, that's the beauty of Dickens. By his own efforts, his own endeavours, he pulled himself up, and by the time of his death, he was the second most famous Victorian, second only to Queen Victoria. So he really did make it mega, and he was a rock star. There's no doubt about it.
Globally, I mean, a global rock star. We love it, as you say, the very, very first celebrity. Now, but finally, just to finish on, and it's fascinating looking at Dickens, and we'll look a lot more. But every time we look at Dickens, every time we look at things in history, we always discover something different. Now, you've been looking at Dickens for a long, long time. You're doing all of these tours. What is the most surprising thing which very few people know about Dickens?
Oh, there's a question. I'll tell you the most surprising thing. Christmas Carol, which was perhaps Dickens' best-known novel. It took him 6 weeks to write it.
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
The rule of 6, and it's coming.
Rule of 6.
The rule of 6.
6 weeks. He started it in early October 1843, and he finished it on the 2nd of December 1843.
Just in time.
Just in time. Well, of course, he had to do it in time for Christmas, because if you're going to write a Christmas ghost story, you've got to get
I've got to get
no
out
point
for
getting it out in
Christmas.
March.
So there's nothing better than a deadline to make it happen. So Christmas Carol, written in 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Just goes to show. Well, always a joy. Richard Jones, thank you so much for being my guest and talking about Dickens. We'll have you back. What are we going to talk about next time?
God bless us, everyone. I don't know. Let's talk about. Yes, let's talk about him.
We'll think of something, because I love all these. We've done Jack the Ripper. We've done Charles Dickens. Who else do you do?
We could do Shakespeare. We could talk about
Let's
Shakespeare. We should talk about
the
Shakespeare.
Bard.
That's it, yeah.
That's
the
it.
Bard.
So Charles Dickens, when he's writing EastEnders, get out of me pub, you're Bard. That would be it. He would have said that to Shakespeare. It would have been good.
Well,
thank you.
There's one last thing to tell you about Dickens before we go, is that Shakespeare's birthplace would have been demolished. The way in Stratford-on-Avon would have been demolished had it not been for Charles Dickens, because he was on the committee that raised the money to save Shakespeare's birthplace, and he did it by staging plays at the what is now the Theatre Royal on Haymarket. And put on various plays there, Shakespeare plays. He loved Shakespeare. Dickens was fanatic about Shakespeare, and he loved Shakespeare plays, and he helped save Shakespeare's birthplace in Stratford-on-Avon. So there you go. There's a connection.
Fantastic. And this is what I love about this. There's always a nice little segue from last time we did the discovery of witchcraft, and we said, Dickens liked a little bit of magic, and then we come on to Dickens, and then we've done Dickens saved Shakespeare. So this is good. I like the segues.
There we go.
Always a joy. Richard Jones, thank you for segueing us into the next one. We'll see
Thank you very
soon.
much. God bless, and have a good Christmas.
Bye-bye. So thank you again to Richard Jones for being my special guest and giving us all things Dickens. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or you have any comments, or have suggestions of anything at all, write to me at guests@octopustv.com. That's guests@octopustv.com. Don't forget to subscribe to Octopus TV on YouTube and Dailymotion and all the usual channels. But for me, thank you again to Richard for being my guest, and for you for joining me. I've been Andrew Eborn. You've been great. Goodbye.